Forget the Hollywood shootouts in dusty streets at high noon. Real outlaws didn't announce their attacks or give lawmen a fighting chance. They used ambush tactics so ruthless, so calculated, that posses and marshals rode straight into slaughter without ever seeing it coming. These weren't random acts of violence. They were surgical strikes planned by men who understood that survival on the frontier meant outsmarting the law, not outgunning it. From the 1860s through the 1890s, outlaws refined these deadly tactics through trial, error, and the bodies of lawmen who learned too late. Today, we're exposing 15 secret ambush strategies that turn the hunted into the hunters, transforming desperate criminals into tactical geniuses who rewrote the rules of frontier warfare. Number 15, the false surrender trap. The deadliest trick in the outlaw playbook. Picture a posse closing in on a group of cornered outlaws. The criminals wave a white cloth, shouting their surrender, hands raised high. The lawmen, exhausted from days of pursuit and relieved the chase is ending without bloodshed, lower their guard and ride closer to accept the surrender. That moment of relaxation was the last thing many lawmen ever felt. Hidden Confederates positioned in covered positions would open fire the instant the posse entered the kill zone, catching them completely exposed and unprepared. The Dalton Gang used this tactic outside of Coffeyville, Kansas in 1892, though it ultimately failed when locals caught on. But lesser-known gangs perfected it across the Oklahoma Territory and Arizona, where remote locations meant no witnesses survived to warn others. The false surrender worked because it exploited the lawmen's own moral code. Unlike outlaws who would shoot a man in the back without hesitation, most marshals and sheriffs believed in giving criminals a chance to surrender. That honor became a fatal weakness. Reports from the 1880s describe at least 17 separate incidents where posses were decimated by false surrender ambushes, with survival rates below 30% once the trap was sprung. The tactic was so effective that by the 1890s, some lawmen began refusing all surrenders, shooting on sight instead, a brutal but necessary adaptation to outlaw deception. Number 14, the mirror flash signal. Long-distance communication that coordinated ambushes across miles of open territory. Before telegraphs reached every frontier town, outlaws needed ways to signal Confederates positioned miles away. They discovered that a simple piece of mirror or polished metal could flash sunlight across incredible distances, creating a crude but effective communication system. One outlaw would track a posse's movement, while a partner positioned miles ahead at the intended ambush site waited for the signal. A series of flashes would indicate the number of riders, their weaponry, and their exact route. The system was borrowed from military heliograph techniques used during the Indian Wars, but outlaws adapted it for criminal purposes with devastating results. The James Younger Gang reportedly used mirror signals during their attempted robbery of the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota in 1876, coordinating lookouts across town. Similarly, the Wild Bunch employed the tactic across Wyoming and Utah, where vast open spaces and bright sunlight made mirror flashing incredibly effective. Lawmen often had no idea they were being watched and reported, their every move telegraphed to the men waiting to kill them. The beauty of the mirror signal was its simplicity and deniability. If caught with a mirror, an outlaw could claim it was for shaving. No codebooks, no written messages, nothing incriminating except a piece of polished metal. Several posses reported seeing unexplained light flashes before being ambushed, but few connected the signals to coordinated outlaw communications until it was too late. Number 13, the stampede diversion. Turning 1,000 pounds of horseflesh into weapons of chaos. Outlaws discovered that spoking a herd of cattle or horses directly into an approaching posse created instant pandemonium that turned organized lawmen into scattered, vulnerable targets. The tactic required patience and positioning. Outlaws would locate a herd grazing near the trail they knew a posse would follow, then wait until the lawmen came into range. A few gunshots or burning brands would send the herd into a stampede aimed directly at the riders. The sound alone was terrifying. Hundreds of hooves thundering across hard ground, creating a wall of dust and muscle that no man on horseback could stop or avoid. Horses would rear and scatter, throwing riders and breaking formation. In the confusion, outlaws would attack from multiple directions, picking off disorganized lawmen who couldn't coordinate a defense, or even locate their attackers through the choking dust. The beauty of the stampede ambush was its dual threat. lawmen had to simultaneously avoid being trampled to death and defend against gunfire from concealed positions, splitting their attention and making both threats more deadly. A rider trying to control a panicked horse while dodging cattle couldn't aim a weapon. A dismounted lawman scrambling to avoid hooves couldn't maintain cover or return effective fire. The Clanton Gang used this technique in Arizona Territory during the 1880s, running cattle through a posse from Tombstone and killing 3 deputies in the resulting chaos. Wild Bunch members perfected the stampede ambush in Wyoming, where massive cattle drives provided perfect cover. They would blend in with legitimate drovers, then trigger stampedes at precisely calculated moments. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical danger. Men feared being trampled as much as being shot, and that fear made them abandon positions and expose themselves to gunfire. Historical records from the 1880s and 90s document at least 24 ambushes that incorporated stampedes, with survival rates for lawmen dropping below 40%. The tactic eventually became so notorious that experienced marshals would detour miles out of their way to avoid areas with large herds, giving outlaws exactly what they wanted: more time to escape. Some posses refused outright to pursue criminals through cattle country during driving season, effectively creating safe zones where outlaws could operate with near impunity. Number 12, the hanging tree setup, a grotesque display that transformed a symbol of frontier justice into a deadly trap. Outlaws would stage an apparent lynching, leaving a body hanging from a prominent tree along a well-traveled trail. Curious or duty-bound lawmen would naturally investigate, dismounting to examine the victim or cut down the body. The moment they focused on the hanging corpse, concealed shooters would open fire from covered positions surrounding the tree. The tactic was particularly effective because it played on lawmen's investigative instincts and their duty to document crimes. Many couldn't resist examining the scene, trying to identify the victim or determine if this was a legal hanging or a murder. That curiosity created predictable behavior, and predictable behavior meant easy targets. The body itself was sometimes a Confederate playing dead, who would suddenly draw a concealed weapon once lawmen gathered close. Other times it was an actual corpse, often someone who had double-crossed the gang or failed to pay protection money. Either way, the hanging tree became a killing field. Reports from Texas Rangers in the 1870s describe multiple incidents where investigation of apparent lynchings resulted in ambushes. The Rufus Buck Gang in Oklahoma Territory was notorious for this tactic, using it at least 3 times between 1895 and 1896. What made the hanging tree particularly insidious was its dual purpose. Even if lawmen suspected a trap and approached cautiously, they still had to investigate, creating delays that allowed outlaws to escape. And if they didn't investigate, they ignored a potential murder, violating their sworn duty. Either way, the outlaws won. Number 11, the waterhole poisoning. Not a direct ambush, but a strategic contamination that weakened pursuing posses. The frontier was unforgiving, and water sources were scarce in many territories. Outlaws who knew the terrain could predict exactly which springs or water holes a pursuing posse would need to use. Poisoning or contaminating these sources wouldn't kill immediately, but it would sicken lawmen enough to slow pursuit and create vulnerability. The contamination methods varied. Sometimes outlaws would dump dead animals into springs, causing bacterial infections that would leave men doubled over with dysentery within hours. Other times, they used naturally occurring toxic plants ground into powder and mixed into water sources. The most ruthless outlaws used arsenic or other poisons purchased from corrupt pharmacists, creating water that would sicken or kill anyone who drank it. The Clanton Gang allegedly poisoned a water hole near the Mexican border in 1881, sickening a pursuing U.S. Marshal posse so badly they had to abandon the chase for 3 days. Similar tactics were reported across New Mexico and Arizona territories, where water scarcity made contamination particularly effective. The brilliance of waterhole poisoning was its delayed effect. By the time lawmen realized they'd been poisoned, the outlaws were 50 miles away, and proving deliberate poisoning was nearly impossible since natural contamination from dead animals or bad water was common on the frontier. Lawmen learned to send scouts ahead to test water before the main posse drank, but this slowed pursuit even further, giving outlaws exactly what they needed to escape. Number 10, the dust cloud deception, creating phantom riders that pulled posses in wrong directions. In the dry territories of the Southwest, raising dust was unavoidable when riding. Outlaws discovered they could create false dust clouds by dragging brush behind riderless horses, or even just riding in circles before heading in a completely different direction. A posse seeing dust on the horizon would assume they were closing in on their quarry and ride hard toward it, only to find nothing but tracks leading in circles. By the time they realized the deception, the real outlaws were miles away on a different trail. The technique required understanding wind patterns and terrain. Dust clouds needed to be visible from a distance, but positioned where following them would waste maximum time. Some gangs stationed a single rider to create the dust cloud, while the main group escaped in the opposite direction, sacrificing the decoy if necessary. The effectiveness of dust cloud deception peaked in the 1880s across Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas, where vast desert expanses and limited water meant posses had to commit to pursuing whatever trail they saw. The Curly Bill Gang used this tactic repeatedly near Tombstone, creating false trails that sent lawmen chasing ghosts across the desert, while the real gang rested in hidden canyons. What made this tactic particularly frustrating for lawmen was the impossibility of ignoring dust clouds. Any movement could be the real outlaws escaping, so every dust cloud required investigation, burning daylight and exhausting both men and horses. Some posses spent weeks chasing phantom riders before realizing they'd been systematically deceived. Number 9, the double back trail, retracing your own path to ambush pursuers from behind. The tactic seems simple, but executing it required extraordinary horsemanship and nerve. Outlaws being pursued would ride hard in an obvious direction, leaving clear tracks. Then, at a strategic point, they would carefully reverse course, walking their horses backward in their own hoof prints before branching off perpendicular to the original trail. The posse, focused on following the tracks ahead, would ride past the hidden outlaws without noticing the split. Once the lawmen passed, the outlaws would attack from behind, the last direction anyone expected. The double-back ambush exploited tunnel vision, the tendency of trackers to focus forward on the trail rather than watching their flanks and rear. It also reversed the tactical situation, turning pursued into pursuers. Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch perfected this technique in the canyon country of Utah and Colorado, where rocky terrain allowed the horses to move without leaving obvious tracks. In one documented case from 1899, the Wild Bunch double-backed on a pursuing railroad posse, killing 2 Pinkertons and wounding 3 others in a 5-minute gun battle before escaping. The tactic required intimate knowledge of terrain and tracking, skills most outlaws developed from years of running from the law. They understood exactly how far they needed to ride before lawmen would commit to the chase, and precisely where to execute the reversal for maximum surprise. The doubleback became so feared that experienced lawmen began leaving rear guards, but this split their forces and made them vulnerable to other ambush tactics. Number 8, the cliff edge funnel, using terrain to force lawmen into a killing corridor. Outlaws would identify locations where the trail naturally narrowed between cliffs or dense vegetation, creating a funnel that channeled riders into a tight group. They would then position shooters on the high ground above the funnel, creating a perfect kill zone where every shot had multiple targets and escape was nearly impossible. The funneling effect eliminated the lawmen's numerical advantage. A 20-man posse compressed into a narrow space couldn't maneuver, couldn't spread out, and couldn't bring their numbers to bear. Meanwhile, shooters positioned above had perfect fields of fire and the protection of elevation and cover. Several notorious ambush sites across the frontier became known as death traps after multiple posses were slaughtered in them. The Hole in the Wall in Wyoming, made famous by the Wild Bunch, was essentially a massive natural funnel that allowed a few defenders to hold off large forces indefinitely. Similarly, various canyon passes in Arizona and New Mexico became feared by lawmen who understood the tactical impossibility of safely traversing them while pursuing criminals. The cliff edge funnel was so effective that some outlaw gangs would deliberately flee toward these locations, knowing they could turn and fight with massive advantages. Reports from the 1880s describe posses taking 70 to 80% casualties in canyon ambushes, with survival often depending on pure luck rather than skill or tactics. Lawmen eventually learned to dismount and scout narrow passes before entering them, but this slowed pursuit to a crawl and often allowed outlaws to escape regardless. Number 7, the night camp infiltration, striking when lawmen thought they were safe. Pursuing a gang across hundreds of miles required camping overnight, and those camps became vulnerable targets. Outlaws discovered they could sneak into the perimeter of a lawman camp after dark, eliminate sentries silently, and then attack the sleeping posse with overwhelming surprise. The tactic required patience and stealth, qualities most people don't associate with Wild West outlaws, but the best criminal gangs were patient hunters when necessary. They would follow a posse at a distance, noting their camping patterns and sentry rotations. Then, on a carefully chosen night, they would infiltrate and strike. The attack usually came in the hours before dawn, when sentries were most tired and sleeping men were deepest in slumber. Gunfire, knives, and sometimes even hatchets would transform a peaceful camp into a slaughterhouse in seconds. The James Younger gang allegedly used this tactic against a pursuing posse in Missouri during the 1870s, killing 5 lawmen before they could organize a defense. The Wild Bunch employed similar night raids across multiple territories, understanding that lawmen exhausted from days of riding were vulnerable and slow to react. What made night infiltration particularly terrifying was the reversal of security. Lawmen made camp specifically to rest and recover, trusting in sentries and distance to keep them safe. Discovering that outlaws could penetrate that security and attack them in their bedrolls destroyed confidence and made every subsequent night terrifying. Some posses, after surviving a night attack, refused to sleep, instead remaining mounted and ready to flee, which exhausted them even faster and made them easier targets during daylight hours. Number 6, the bridge collapse trap. Engineering failures that became death sentences. Wooden bridges over rivers and ravines were common across the frontier, but often poorly maintained. Outlaws discovered they could weaken bridge supports, not enough to cause immediate collapse, but enough that the added weight of a pursuing posse would trigger catastrophic failure. The sabotage was carefully calculated. Support beams would be partially sawed through, deck planks removed in non-visible locations, and rope anchors cut to single strands. The bridge would appear sound to casual inspection, but the moment multiple mounted riders entered it, physics would do the rest. The collapse would dump lawmen, horses, and equipment into rivers or onto rocks below, causing injuries, drownings, and chaos. While the posse struggled to rescue survivors and recover bodies, the outlaws would either attack from the opposite bank or simply continue their escape with a massive time advantage. Historical records document several suspicious bridge collapses during outlaw pursuits in the 1880s and 90s. A particularly devastating incident occurred in Montana Territory in 1884, when a bridge over the Yellowstone River collapsed under a pursuing sheriff's posse, killing 7 men and 11 horses. While never proven, local witnesses reported seeing known outlaws inspecting the bridge days before the collapse. The tactic was rarely used because it required significant preparation and some engineering knowledge, but when executed properly, it was devastatingly effective. Later improvements in bridge construction and regular inspections by railroad and territorial authorities made sabotage more difficult, but remote bridges remained vulnerable throughout the entire Wild West era. Number 5, the fake wagon breakdown. Using the appearance of helplessness to bait lawmen into close range, outlaws would stage what appeared to be a broken-down wagon on the trail, complete with a desperate-looking traveler trying to repair a wheel or dealing with a lame horse. Lawmen, being generally decent men who helped those in need, would naturally stop to offer assistance. The moment they dismounted and approached the wagon, concealed gang members would emerge from hiding and open fire at point-blank range. The fake breakdown exploited multiple assumptions. First, that people in distress were victims needing help. Second, that a single traveler with a broken wagon posed no threat. Third, that stopping to help was both morally right and tactically safe, since it involved only one person. All 3 assumptions were wrong, and lawmen died learning that lesson. The wagon itself often contained concealed shooters lying in the bed, while other gang members hid in nearby brush or gullies. The distressed traveler would engage lawmen in conversation, positioning them for maximum exposure while signaling Confederates when to attack. One documented case from Texas in 1879 described a fake breakdown that killed 4 lawmen and wounded 2 others. The supposed traveler was actually a female outlaw whose gender made lawmen even less suspicious and more willing to approach closely. The Wild Bunch used similar tactics with disabled wagons in Wyoming, understanding that lawmen's helping instincts were exploitable weaknesses. What made the fake breakdown particularly effective was its repeatability. Unlike location-based ambushes that could only work once before becoming known, the broken wagon could be moved to new locations and used against different posses, with lawmen's natural helpfulness ensuring fresh victims every time. Number 4. The canyon echo confusion. Using acoustics to make lawmen think they were surrounded. Deep canyons and rock formations created natural echo chambers that outlaws could weaponize. A single gunshot fired in the right location would echo and reverberate, sounding like multiple shooters firing from different positions. Outlaws understood this acoustic phenomenon and used it to make small groups sound like large gangs, causing posses to overestimate the opposition and either retreat or scatter. The tactic was particularly effective when combined with actual ambush positions. Outlaws would place a few shooters at strategic points in a canyon, then begin firing in a coordinated sequence designed to maximize echoes. The resulting cacophony would sound like dozens of guns firing from all directions, creating panic and confusion among lawmen who couldn't determine the actual number or position of their attackers. In their fear and confusion, lawmen would often fire wildly at shadows and echoes, depleting their ammunition while hitting nothing. Meanwhile, the actual outlaws, knowing the precise positions of their own shooters, could aim deliberately and pick off panicked targets. The Apache Kid, a renegade outlaw operating in Arizona during the 1880s and early 1890s, reportedly used canyon echo tactics to hold off larger posses with just 3 or 4 Confederates. Similarly, various gangs in the canyonlands of Utah and Colorado turned acoustic confusion into a standard ambush component. What made echo confusion particularly maddening for lawmen was the impossibility of accurate threat assessment. They never knew if they faced 3 men or 30, which made tactical decisions nearly impossible. Some posses, overestimating the opposition, would retreat from battles they could have won, giving outlaws victory through pure acoustic trickery. Number 3. The sun-blind position. Positioning ambushes so lawmen rode directly into blinding sunlight. Outlaws who understood the daily arc of the sun could predict exactly when and where it would create blinding glare along specific trails. They would position their ambush so that approaching lawmen would be riding directly into the low morning or evening sun, unable to see attackers positioned in the glare. The tactic required timing and positioning. Outlaws needed to know when a posse would reach the ambush point, accounting for their likely pace and start time. They also needed terrain that forced lawmen to approach from a specific direction, preventing them from simply changing their angle to avoid the glare. When everything aligned properly, the result was lawmen riding blind into prepared positions, unable to see threats until gunfire erupted from what appeared to be a wall of light. The sun-blind ambush was reported multiple times across New Mexico territory during the 1880s, where the open desert terrain and predictable sun position made it particularly effective. The Clanton gang allegedly used the tactic near the Mexican border, understanding that posses starting from Tombstone would reach certain canyon mouths at precisely the wrong time of day. In these ambushes, lawmen described being unable to see anything except blinding white light and the vague silhouettes of rocks, making aim-return fire impossible. They would fire blindly into the glare, while outlaws, backlit and invisible, picked them off with precision shots. The psychological impact of sunblind ambushes extended beyond the immediate casualties. Lawmen who survived learned to fear late afternoon pursuits and sunrise approaches to likely ambush points, creating delays and caution that benefited outlaws even when no actual attack occurred. Number 2. The town's civilian cover. Hiding among innocent people to attack lawmen in populated areas. Most ambush tactics focused on remote wilderness areas, but some of the deadliest occurred in towns where outlaws could blend into civilian populations. Gang members would arrive in a frontier town days before a pursuing posse, establishing themselves as apparent drifters, gamblers, or cowpunchers. When the lawmen arrived and began asking questions or making arrests, Confederates hiding in plain sight would open fire from windows, alleys, and rooftops. The civilian cover tactic was particularly devastating because lawmen couldn't respond with overwhelming force without risking innocent lives. Outlaws exploited this limitation ruthlessly, positioning themselves near families, in crowded saloons, or behind shop counters where return fire would endanger bystanders. This forced lawmen to either accept being shot at without returning effective fire or risk killing innocents. a choice that often paralyzed them long enough to be killed. The Dalton gang's attempted robbery of 2 banks simultaneously in Coffeyville, Kansas in 1892 included elements of this tactic, though it ultimately failed when armed citizens joined the fight against them. More successful was the Wild Bunch's use of civilian cover in various Wyoming and Colorado towns, where gang members would hide among ranch hands and miners, becoming invisible until the moment they attacked. What made town ambushes exceptionally dangerous was the confusion factor. In wilderness ambushes, anyone shooting was an enemy. In town ambushes, determining who was an outlaw and who was a panicked civilian was nearly impossible, resulting in friendly fire incidents and hesitation that cost lawmen their lives. Several documented cases describe posses being decimated in town ambushes while armed citizens watched, unable to determine who they should help. Number 1. The inside man betrayal. The deadliest ambush tactic of all, planting a traitor within the posse itself. Nothing was more effective than having someone inside the lawmen's ranks, feeding information, sabotaging equipment, and ultimately signaling when to attack. The inside man could be a deputy on an outlaw's payroll, a civilian guide secretly affiliated with the gang, or even a supposed victim seeking to join the posse for revenge. Whoever they were, they had access to every plan, every position, and every weakness. The traitor would ensure the posse took routes that led into perfect ambush sites, would suggest camping in vulnerable locations, and would create situations where lawmen were maximally exposed. When the attack came, the inside man would either actively sabotage the defense, shooting lawmen in the back, or simply fail to fight, creating a hole in the defensive line. The psychological devastation of inside man betrayals extended far beyond the immediate casualties. Surviving lawmen would forever question the loyalty of anyone riding with them, destroying the trust necessary for effective law enforcement. Several major manhunts in the 1880s and 90s were compromised by inside men, though many cases were never publicly acknowledged because territorial authorities didn't want to admit corruption in their ranks. The most famous suspected case involved a deputy U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma Territory who allegedly provided the Doolin-Dalton gang with information about multiple posse movements between 1892 and 1895. Though never proven, several suspiciously effective ambushes during that period suggested inside information. The inside man represented the ultimate outlaw tactic, turning the lawmen's own ranks against them and transforming trusted allies into deadly enemies. From false surrenders to planted traitors, outlaws didn't survive by being faster on the draw. They survived by being smarter, more ruthless, and more willing to turn every advantage of terrain, timing, and trust into a lethal trap. These 15 tactics weren't the work of mindless criminals. They were the calculated strategies of tactical geniuses who understood that the real battle wasn't fought on dusty streets at high noon. It was fought in canyons at dawn, on bridges at crossing time, and in the moments when lawmen let their guard down. The Wild West we remember from movies never existed. The real frontier was won and lost through ambushes, betrayals, and brutal tactics that Hollywood would never show. Every outlaw gang that survived more than a few months understood these principles, adapting them to their territories and perfecting them through blood and experience. The lawmen who survived learned to counter these tactics, but that knowledge came at a terrible price measured in graves across the frontier. So, which of these ruthless tactics shocked you the most? Did you realize outlaws were this tactically sophisticated? Drop your thoughts below. And if you wanted to keep uncovering the real Wild West that history tried to forget, subscribe because we're just getting started exposing the truth behind the legends.